And a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Director of Insights at Friends of Europe, but your moderator here today in our town hall, physical but virtual space for this event on a cultural deal for Europe. Those of you who were here last year may recall that in September, a group of organizations got together and organized a very successful à rentrée to discuss issues of culture and arts. They include the Culture Action Europe, the European Cultural Foundation, and Europa Nostra, which is coordinating the Heritage Alliance. And they brought together quite a group of people at Beaux-Arts last year on the 23rd of September, where we discussed with a new group, a new batch of MEPs about the importance, at that time, what the new College of Commissioners and others will do around arts and culture. And those of you who were present in that debate, which I was also the moderator for, there's a vibrant conversation about that phrase about the European way of life. And now look at us, zooming forward. We had a new college with huge ambitions, and suddenly something of a size of a meteor or more has hit us left field and completely changed our world, our way of living, our way of socializing, our way of work, our way of arts and culture. That's the virus crisis. COVID-19 has fundamentally changed everything about us. Tons have written about it. We have seen the impact of it. We continue to see the impact of it. And we know it's had the biggest hit on the world economy, on the European economy and national economies. We know that the current proposals that are before the Commission and the Parliaments, the Member States, which are in the shape of a number of funds, with either the European Recovery Fund, Next Gen EU, and a whole raft of others, are being developed in a way that borrow from the capital markets and hopefully create a different kind of economic underpinning for our recovery. But as you know, those of you who follow the news, Hungary and Poland have done the do and the dirty in terms of really vetoing an element of the whole package because they don't want to abide by the rule of law. But that's a separate matter, perhaps related. But what we're here to discuss is a cultural deal for Europe and the central place for culture in EU's post-pandemic recovery. I think it's too early to call it post-pandemic recovery. I think there's a long time yet, but you know, there's been so much written about the impact. We've heard about job losses. We've heard about the impact on people's mental health. We've heard about the sense of lack of unity within the EU. But we've also, but it's been almost like an invisible issue, but people have been speaking from the margins, and people have been shouting loudly, is that, what about arts and culture? Arts and culture is that thing that only when you rub it out of our local fabric and our national context, you miss it. It's almost one of those things that we take for granted. And also often it's seen as being a luxury or nice to have. And so when public authorities are thinking about their budgets, from my experience, at least in the UK, but I know this is written across Europe, is that the first thing to go is funding of local arts and culture groups, and they're the easiest hit. Yet, what we forget and what we underestimate is the role of culture and arts in creating the glue, the social fabric of our communities, our societies, and our nation states. It's not simply about identity, but also we know that arts and culture creates that sense of life stream, which improves our mental health, improves our memory, makes us connect intergenerationally, and a whole range of other things. It's inspirational, it's innovative, it binds generations across time, but also it pokes an eye at the future, and also much more at a local level, how communities make sense of each other. And it's also a space for creativity, ultimately, and enjoyment. But that's all at threat in the current scenario that we're in. So what we're here to do is, as we have a discussion around cultural arts, as you can imagine, it's in 3 chapters. We have 3 chapters for you with a stellar cast of contributors. I want to welcome all of you on Zoom. We have nearly 300 folk listening to this, watching this, which is great. Thank you very much. Please do signal anything you want to using our hashtag Cultural Deal EU. So there's a hashtag hashtag Culture Deal EU, which is there and ready for people to post things. So please do make use of that. Also, as it is a culture and arts discussion, we have a resident illustrator. So last year we had Mena, and I'm really pleased to welcome her again, who will be using her inimitable skills to draw attention through her illustrations to the debate and some of the issues that we are dealing with in this conversation. So we have a couple of hours and 3 chapters and a bunch of speakers from the arts world, from the political world, and the civil service world, and more. And it's a warm welcome to, welcome commissioners, politicians, and others to this debate. I know that we have both Maria Gabrielle and Clement Baum, both of whom are actually European Young Leaders for the Friends of Europe, and both are doing some fantastic things in their own right, in different ways. And we look forward to welcome amongst a whole range of others. So, chapter 1. So this first chapter deals with how we need to ensure that culture is a driving force for recovery and also has its central place. But before I move into our speakers, we have a short video that we'd like to play.
Buongiorno a tutti, ringrazio Europa Nostra, Culture Action Europe, la Fondazione Culturale Europea, e non solo per aver organizzato questa iniziativa, ma anche per aver continuato a sostenere il settore culturale europeo durante questi mesi difficili, contribuendo a tenere vivo il dibattito sul ruolo della cultura nel progetto europeo. La crisi del Covid-19 ha avuto un impatto senza precedenti sui nostri sistemi sanitari, sulle nostre economie, sulle nostre vite, ma anche sul mondo culturale. E il Parlamento ha riconosciuto fin dall'inizio gli effetti drammatici che la pandemia provocava nel settore culturale e creativo, su numerosi lavoratori, sui professionisti della cultura, su tanti uomini e donne, il cui presente e futuro sono diventate gravemente incerti a causa delle misure di contenimento. La dimensione culturale non è un aspetto secondario delle nostre società, anzi è determinante per la qualità della nostra vita, ed è per questo che il Parlamento europeo si è impegnato fin dall'inizio a sostenere quello che rappresenta un settore cruciale per la costruzione di un mondo nuovo. Il patrimonio culturale, l'arte figurativa, la musica, il cinema, lo spettacolo non sono aspetti secondari, ma sono elementi che contribuiscono ad arricchire la nostra cittadinanza europea, a darci personalità. Per questo lo scorso settembre il Parlamento europeo ha adottato una risoluzione che invita tutti gli Stati membri a riconoscere la necessità di un sostegno massiccio alla cultura, di dedicarvi una parte significativa delle misure per la ripresa economica. Ma non solo, durante i negoziati sul bilancio pluriannuale dell'Unione mi sono impegnato ad assicurare un budget ambizioso per il programma Europa Creativa, al fine di continuare a sostenere il settore per i prossimi 7 anni. L'accordo che abbiamo raggiunto nei giorni scorsi con il Consiglio europeo è una testimonianza del nostro impegno a dare voce alle esigenze dei cittadini, a rispettarli in tutti i suoi ambiti. Per il Parlamento europeo questo rappresenta un ottimo risultato, considerando l'aumento significativo di fondi rispetto alle proposte precedenti. Tutti noi sappiamo quanto il settore della cultura in questo momento stia pagando gli effetti del Covid. Abbiamo un piano di ripresa senza precedenti che deve sostenere la nostra economia. Spero che ognuno di noi sia consapevole di questo e che ogni Stato membro si impegni a garantire alla cultura e al patrimonio culturale, che non sono la stessa cosa, il posto fondamentale che meritano in ogni piano nazionale. Dobbiamo pensare alla cultura come perno per la ripresa, in particolare per la transizione verde, digitale, ma anche come cemento sociale di un mondo post-Covid che va ricostruito, in cui i legami interpersonali dovranno essere riallacciati, perché i luoghi della cultura sono soprattutto luoghi di incontro. La conferenza sul futuro dell'Europa, che è un'ambizione di questa legislatura, speriamo possa partire al più presto, sarà l'occasione per i cittadini europei di proclamare il loro viscerale attaccamento alla creazione culturale e al patrimonio culturale, che sono le fondamenta delle loro identità, delle loro convivenze, della loro speranza. Ci permetterà anche di esplorare le modalità con cui continuare a conciliare identità e universalità attraverso il progetto europeo e a ribadire il nostro motto, di cui siamo molto orgogliosi, perché noi siamo uniti nella diversità. E in un momento in cui la notte sembrava essersi impadronita della nostra vita privata, dei luoghi culturali, dei concerti, dei cinema, dei teatri, gli europei hanno preso i loro strumenti e hanno cantato anche sui loro balconi. L'arte ha un potere catartico che può accompagnare la società post-pandemica sulla strada della resilienza. E l'arte non è un accessorio, è un viatico. L'arte non è politica, è poetica, una forza creativa che ci anima, che ci permette di vivere insieme, di sopravvivere individualmente e collettivamente. Grazie a tutti per aver organizzato questo seminario, per mettere in luce un argomento così determinante per la nostra vita e per il nostro futuro. Buon lavoro, speriamo presto di poterci incontrare di persona.
So, very fine words from the president, important words. But how do they get translated into action? I thought it was quite interesting. It's really important, the things that he said, absolutely, I'm not denying that. And I think one of the important phrases he used in that was that culture and arts is the pivot of both the green and digital recovery more broadly. How do we make sense of that? And how do we hold that to account, given what we know about the discussions that are taking place at the moment around recovery and the place of arts and culture in them? We know that, you know, the European Parliament, as mentioned also, the Cultural Recovery for Europe resolution adopted by an overwhelming majority in September. It integrates and gives political momentum to many of the demands from the sector quite clearly. I want to invite Sabine Verheyen, who is the chair of the Culture Committee, to join us now. Hello, Sabine.
Hello, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Fine, wonderful. So,
great, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Excellent. Sabine, tell us, first give us a sense of where we are right now in terms of, given we've all been watching the news, you know what's happening currently. There's been this, fundamental agreement. We've heard David Sassoli say what he said. Everyone says culture and arts are important. We all know in our lives, we know that, and it's, when we think about the cultural arts sector, it's a broad church, if you like. So cinemas are dying, other venues are dying, and people are doing things differently in free space like streets, etc., elsewhere where they can. Tell us where it stands at the moment in terms of this agreement that's been reached, and how much can we rely on it, and any other points you want to make in response to where we find ourselves at the moment. Over to you, Sabine.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I would like to say that this year has really been an absolute challenging year for all of us. Our lives are very different than they were 1 year ago, and also the way how we had to negotiate and discuss, especially when it comes to the multi-annual framework, was quite different to how it was in the previous times. The coronavirus has affected almost every aspect of our lives, and explicitly it has affected the culture and creative sector. And that was the reason why we had to stand up. We had to raise awareness. We had to discuss with the colleagues also in the budget committees to raise awareness on not just, and I think it's one of the most important issues of meanings of the cultural and creative sector is to be the glue for democracy, the glue for our societies. But what we have to show out very clearly was that it's also a very huge and very important economical factor in the European economy. We have 4.2% of the GDP coming out of the cultural and creative industries and sectors. And we have more than 7 million, up to 8 million working places in this sector. And that's not just a little bit, it's really a huge amount of people, and mainly young people working in the sector. And that was a point we had to raise very clear. So I was very happy that in the end, after having reductions through the proposals by Charles Michel in January this year, then the new proposal of the Commission, which was clearly under the former proposal that was made by the Commission in 2018, and would just be would even be less than the money we had that was available for the last 7 years. So I was very happy that during the negotiations it could be reached that we get a top up of 600 million euros for the Creative Europe program. I think that's a lot of money. It's not what the Parliament asked for, but I think it's really a big success in the situation we have. What's at the moment? At the moment, we have a situation that there is a general agreement on the MFF, also on the figures for especially the Creative Europe program.
Yes.
But at the moment, it is blocked due to the discussions with countries like Hungary, Poland, and like
Indeed.
I heard a few minutes ago, Slovenia is joining them when it comes to the
rule of law issue,
rule of law mechanism. But I think that will not hit in general the agreement on the amount of money that will be made available to the different programs. But it is important for the general approach we will have. What we have to discuss and what's still under discussion is the question how the money will be distributed and spent.
Exactly.
And if there are some concrete points in the recovery fund. And that is a point where we still have to work on. Because in the resolution we had a clear demand for a 2% earmark for the cultural and creative sector. That's at the moment not clearly on the table. It is remarked in a recital in the Parliament's position for the negotiations, but we have to fight that and to insist on that the member states should, not just should, they have to spend money in the cultural and creative sector, because this sector is so important for the recovery, not just of the cultural and creative industries and the sector itself, but having in mind that cultural and creative industries count on more than 30 up to 40% of the tourism sector, because 30 up to 40% of tourism is cultural tourism. Without cultural events, without big festivals, without museums, without cultural heritage, we will not have tourism in that way like it is. And if we want to recover different sectors, and also if you want to be more innovative, if you want to bring together new technologies, new industries, the digital world, with other new aspects, we need the creative people in the sector. And that's the reason why the sector is not just important, but it's really core to innovation and the recovery of the European Union in many ways.
Indeed, Sabine, and you know, no one would argue with you, and you know, congratulations to you and others who have, you know, really taken this seriously to heart and galvanized support across the Parliament. And as you say, whilst it's reassuring, the number hasn't changed in terms of the spend. We don't know how it will be spent, but also we don't know when agreement will be reached. And correct me if I'm wrong, after there's agreement, national parliaments have to vote on the package before it can actually then be released. And there's a time scale to that. And one of my concerns was, what are your thoughts on, it might take 4 to 5 months, and we might see the sector, certain aspects of it, really nosedive in a way that we haven't experienced right now, given we're all currently in such a high COVID stakes environment. We don't know what's going to happen. People are talking about third wave, etc. Okay, there's a vaccine on the horizon, but we don't know whether that, you know, we've heard from experts that it's next year, next winter, when we'll see something more of a norm. What's your sense of what happens between now and then. And I suppose most importantly, given what we want to conclude with this discussion was that how do we mobilize support from the cultural arts sector, but also wider communities to power your elbow? And what else can they do to join a community to say, this is important, whilst others are saying, you know, my God, you know, the bailout for the private sector is important, etc. So just touch upon that for me. But I also have a question on Zoom from Jenny, who says something about how do we improve private sector collaboration? And, you know, what role can you play in others to underpin, but actually create some form of stability in the long term? Because we don't see the private sector that fully involved in the arts as a partner for culture and arts in a consolidated fashion. Sabine, over to you. Complicated questions, I know, but there we are. We're in a complicated world.
First, we have to say that also the member states, in many member states in the European Union, they see the problems the cultural sectors is in due to the lockdowns and not having the possibility to perform in the way they are normally performing and making their business. What we see is that the awareness raising for this in the member states is much higher. We had already, also from European side, we opened up all the support schemes that were there also for other sectors, explicitly also to the cultural sector. It's always a question how member states implement that. There are many positive examples, but we also know that in some member states the support for the cultural sector is really not enough and not really there. So what we have to do is to enforce these member states to do something. That is what we did through the SURE program that was and the resilience funds. We had money from different funds where we support the member states to help people who are unemployed or lose the possibility to make their business. What we needed and what is now established more are solutions for self-employed people, because the sector is structured in a quite diverse and in a quite, let's say, small scale business structure. We have many small and medium-sized enterprises, self-employed people, which are not covered by the support programs or the support schemes that were available on the member states level. I think it was important that we raised awareness to these problems, and like in Germany or in others, they are now coming up with specific programs for these sectors. That's not enough, I know that, because coming back to a kind of normal will be the only solution, and then give the right support for innovation, for supporting we had also other challenges than just COVID-19 in the sector when it comes to digitization, when it comes to new structures, new distribution ways, and so on and so forth. So I think the recovery fund, when it comes, must be, let's say, a support also for innovation in the sector. It's not just to keep everything like it was, but also to help to set up in a modern, in a future-proof way. That cannot be done in between 1 or 2 weeks or in between a few weeks. So the 4 to 5 months until the money will flow is also needed to support the right programs, the right structures, and the right projects. But what is important is that the sector is not just seen out of the very, very small support schemes that are specific for the cultural sector, but that we have also other support schemes that can support and have to be made more tailor-made to the sector, like, for example, the European Structural Fund, the Social Fund, and other things when it comes to upskilling, reskilling in digital, for artists and so on. So there are many ideas what to do and how to do. The question will be how fast can we get a decided and finalized negotiation on the money. I would hope that Hungary and Poland come back to to a, let's say, more constructive approach, because
It's very
I always
diplomatic
say,
of you, Sabine. Very
yeah, and
diplomatic of
I
you.
normally say when people are respecting the rule of law, they don't have to fear the rule of law mechanism.
Well said. Thank you. And please do bear in mind, I'll bring you in when I say to the Zoom audience, please react to what you've heard from Sabine. What kind of mobilization, but I've heard from some very significant artists across the spectrum who are not eligible for the government grant schemes in terms of unemployment. And some of them who are international artists who've been advised to change career and say, actually, don't continue to being an international pianist or artist of painting, etc., shift career. And my concern is what happens to the decimation of the sector and some of those stars and those emerging stars while we wait for Hungary and Poland and others to abide by these solutions. I want to bring in the Secretary General of the Cultural Arts Fund, Cultural Action Europe. I always get it wrong. Sorry, Terry. It's lovely to welcome you again. Hello.
Hello, I'm here. Yeah, I can hear, I can see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like you to react to what you've heard. There's been certain demands made by the sector. We've heard there's been a level of success. And I think those who are watching and listening in is wanting to hear from you. What's your reaction to what you've heard and what some of the points that you'd like to share as to what needs to be done in this context of trying to make arts and culture winning the argument that it should be part of the recovery package and the recovery of Europe. Over to you, Tere.
Yeah, so as mentioned by President Sassoli and by Mrs. Verheyen, culture is, of course, a fundamental glue to hold the European project and the community, its community together. And we think that right now there is a momentum, a specific momentum, and an urgency to put culture at a central place in reimagining Europe. It is a time where big ideas on the future of Europe are needed, and they're starting to be implemented through these ambitious initiatives like the Green Deal, and of course through the negotiation on the biggest ever European budget, including the European Recovery Fund. And this is why today we want, together with the European Cultural Foundation and Europa Nostra, we want to propose a cultural deal for Europe. Because it is time to combine creative thinking and effective actions. Our cultural deal proposals is an umbrella strategy for giving a leading role to culture by putting it at the center of the European project. And I will start with the necessary recovery of the cultural ecosystem to move to what this means for the European project as a whole. Recovery for me here and for us means clearly not to go back to the same situation as we were before.
Yes.
Before the breakout, of course, because this was not a good situation at all. We drag the structural weak conditions of the cultural ecosystem, precarious working conditions of artists and cultural workers, threats for freedom of artistic expression due to the lack of protection for artists in radicalized policies, the fragile situation also of small projects and small organizations, maybe also due to the difficult access to these micro-organizations to the European Fund. Or also the absence of cultural challenges and approaches in the creation and implementation of policies in a context of high digitization and so many other things. In general, I think we had a lack of centrality of cultural perspectives in the whole European project, which needs to be a cultural project in order to make sense for the whole European community. If we add the effects of the pandemic, the situation, of course, is very worrying. And the pandemic has accelerated and exacerbated this weakness of the cultural ecosystem. And if we do not act decisively, the effects will be devastating. Of course, many other sectors are deeply affected by the consequences of the pandemic, but added to the weakness I was mentioning, we also confront a structural lack of awareness by other policymakers and decision makers about the reality of the cultural and creative sectors and its potential. Sabine Verheyen was mentioning this 4.2% of the European GDP. Yes, of course, this is only creative industry, so we are not considering here the non-profit organizations that are also working and creating jobs and
exactly, yeah.
So therefore, we really need a cultural deal that works in a short, mid, and long term. And we need this at two levels, a structural level and a financial and technical level. For a structural level, a cultural deal should be able to identify the contribution of culture for the sake of the European political project. In order to do so, I think it should be reconsidered, so it should reconsider the position in the society for artists and creators, cultural workers, cultural organizations, through the impulse of a proper recognition at EU level of the status of the artists and creators, including advances in social security, fair employment, fair remuneration, and of course, also important, the inclusion of freedom of artistic expression in the rule of law mechanism, as it is crucial for democratic quality and plurality. And a cultural deal should also acknowledge the interdependence of all human actions. Culture is fundamental, an expression of the humankind, and is a fundamental right. Therefore, we need to facilitate cultural experimentation, cultural practices, and cultural access. But we also need to go beyond sectoral perspectives and bring culture in the transdisciplinary debates that are urgently needed for facing contemporary challenges. On the other side, we need deeper and consistent studies of the influence of culture in well-being, sustainability, economic, scientific, and technological development, and in environmental challenges. On the other side, we plea for including cultural approaches in the drafting of the EU policies to be implemented regarding the 2030 agenda, the Green Deal agenda, the Democracy Action Plan, the AI development, to mention some of them. And at the financial level, cultural deals should mean to create a strong mechanism to heal the cultural ecosystem. In the short and mid-terms, and to effectively include, as was mentioned before, culture as a strategic ecosystem in the Recovery Fund. Back in May, we were all a bit relieved to see culture and creative sectors as one of the 14 ecosystems to be prioritized by the Next Generation EU. But since then, we have seen very little from the Commission to follow up on this intention. And also in May, we were asking to earmark dedicated percentage for culture in the National Recovery and Resilience Palette. And in the meantime, there is a wide consensus in the cultural sector that it is something extremely needed. A couple of weeks ago, Culture Action Europe had the pleasure to coordinate a joint initiative with 110 European cultural networks and organizations, many of them here today, addressing the member states directly to fully include culture in the national plans. So, and asking the Commission to encourage this earmarking. And there I want to really thank the Cult Committee for its trial supporting this plea. But we want to encourage the Parliament to find ways to monitor cultural investment in the recovery funds, and that the member states will hopefully implement. And in the long term, and I'm finishing with this, we have the multi-annual financial framework mechanism and the final negotiation of the programs. We also congratulate the increase, the Cult Committee for the increase of the Creative Europe budget, and we hope that this will strengthen cultural cooperation. But as already mentioned, we still need to mainstream culture across the policy priorities of the coming years. Beyond its purely aesthetic contribution, and this is very clear. So arts and culture offer explorative, interrogative approaches to the world and the way we inhabit it. And a holistic strategy for a collective, equal, and sustainable development needs a cultural pillar in its own right. As a cultural dimension, as was mentioned, cannot be forgotten in shaping societal, environmental, and economic challenges. Cultural deal is about bringing together many different profiles and strong budget investment that would put culture at as a powerful catalyst for the future of the European Common Project, which will be indeed not about only going back to where we were used to, but to imagine new ways, so this paradigm shifts and the new answers to all the new challenges.
Sarah, thank you for that. And it'll be good to hear again, those of you who are on Zoom, what you think about that. I can imagine that this new cultural deal has also been engaging you in your thoughts about what this means. And I think I take away from the point you make about actually for people to really see the benefit and value, we can actually say we all know the benefit, but as you say, one of the lessons learned from the past 10 years is how do you create the economic case, which sounds, I know, terrible, but the economic case and the compelling case for actually knowing that it's of value both to our resilience as societies and communities. And I know it can be done, and some of you have done it in various parts of Europe. And the second point is that if Sabine can't be on her own and the members of the Cultural Committee, but actually how do all of you on Zoom, the 300 or so, but more widely who are interested in this, how do you make sure you mobilize when the national plans are being consulted and make sure that culture and arts is not seen as a throwaway, a nice to have, and only a luxury item, but actually should be central to the recovery plan of member states. I have a reaction. I want to invite one of your colleagues, Sabine, an MEP, Ninas. Hello, Nicholas.
Hello, thank you very much. Yes,
hello, warm welcome.
Thank you. Very good point that you raised in the end. That's something actually that we need to think about more in the future. The time is right now. So when we're talking about the structural funds, as much as the recovery funds, they are all being programmed right now. I mean, officially, they are allowed to start after we have finished voting on the documents. But in practice, this means that the regional authorities are already working on it, obviously. And this is the time now for everybody in the community to really go and lobby for the issue to implement culture in them. What we have done and what we have ensured is that it's always possible to have culture in there. We have, as you might know, used the CCFG and the official plenary statement to ask for or demand for 2% of the RRF being spent on the culture sector. That is now not finally in the text. That's very sad. We're still working on to implement it still in some way so that the member states are bound to do it actually. But in there, but also in all structural funds, culture is possible to be funded. And even the European Court of Audit has said that the structural funds in the past have not been used excessively for cultural structures. And that is something that you need to make sure on the ground, that you go to the regional authorities and ensure that the implementation is being done and that culture is available in the implementation phase. There are the possibility to have talks with the public that is actually deemed necessary for the implementation of the plans. And this is the moment when everybody on the ground needs to go get involved and ensures this. And then also in the later stage, that you use the funds that are possible and apply for projects and actually do it over the structural funds as well. We are very happy that we got the 600 million euros increase for Creative Europe that we worked hard for, but obviously we cannot fund the whole sector only out of this 2.2 billion program. So the structural funds is really the go-to point, and please go to there right now and go to your regional authorities and lobby for implementing or bringing culture in there too.
Nicholas, thank you. Is that your one big message to those who are watching and listening to you right now as a politician that's working hard? You want people to go to the structural funds and say and shout out loud. Is there anything else you want them to do? What would help you in the next few months? No, hey, this is an open conversation. What do you need?
Yeah, of course. No, this is, I think, you know, there's this saying, give a man a fish and he can survive for a day. Teach him how to fish and he'll survive for the future. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, we're at this moment where we need fish on the table at the moment. That's why it's so important to go ahead and lobby for this. But of course, what we need more to do in the future is a project that I would like to see happening in the future is a social benefits net for artists and performers. And that is something that we have to lobby as well very strongly. And if we want to increase the funds for culture activities in the future and be more vocal on these issues, we need to start lobbying better. And that's the thing. The cultural sector lives off its diversity, but in the end, the importance for politics is always, if you can speak with one voice, you have it way much easier to actually implement your politics. And that's something that we as cultural politicians also rely on, to have a big lobby in the background that supports our calls to do more for culture with our other colleagues and with the heads of states, of the member states. And so that's maybe a thing that I've at least learned in the last year, that the culture community needs to come together more in certain issues and be very vocal on very certain issues to get more done in the end.
So Nicholas, the message to all of you watching, listening is more unification in terms of your kind of demand, but also your approach, and, you know, be on his case, be on his and Sabine's case, but power their elbow with support, both at a local but MEP level. And one of the things, you know, all of you, I think, and politicians, but also those of you in the audience, you know, one of the things that we forget and lose sight of is that culture and arts are a fundamental underpinning of making the union and its identity work. It has the potential to bridge the divide between a left and right and center, and actually creates an opportunity to really live the values of what the European Union's about. Without it, we'll see greater senses, a sense of what we see as the shift to the right, and actually, and arts and culture can play a part in creating bridges, but also unity of identity of what it is to be a European here today in the 21st century. On that note, I want to bring in another MEP, Sandro Gozzi. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Hi. A very warm welcome to you.
Hi.
So what would you like to say? How have you react? What would you react? What's your reaction to what you've heard so far? And what particular point would you want to, what's the message you want to give to this audience of, you know, arts practitioners and cultural movers and shakers and those on the ground across Europe in terms of what needs to happen? What's your reaction? Over to you, Sandra.
My reaction, of course, I fully agree. I fully support everything has been said so far. I want to also underline that a good colleague of mine, Laurence Farang, work a lot with Sabine Ferrari and with the other member of the European Parliament in the Culture Committee to advance on these fundamental priorities. You mentioned the resolution, so I wanted, first of all, it was right to recall the work of a good colleague like Laurence. On my perspective, I mean, I want to repeat what has been said. I just go back to history because, and when you want to prepare the future, especially in culture, but not only, it's always very good to go back to history. So, I mean, today I'm talking to you from Italy, I'm talking to you from Rome. And in 1348, we had a very, very strong plague in Florence, which killed 3/5 of the Florence population. It was, so we were at the end of the Middle Age. And after the plague, the Renaissance began. So the first message is after mankind already in the past has shown that to get out of deep social, economic health crisis, culture is always has been one of our best allies, and must be so also to get out of this crisis, which is, as it has been already recalled, health, social, and economic crisis. So I fully support the fact that we have to work at European national level for this 2% of the National Recovery Plan devoted to culture. I think it is essential. I think that we have also to prepare the ground to really defend culture beyond the very necessary money. You have already talked about Creative Europe. I would add also that we have worked a lot to increase the budget of the Erasmus program. It's not what we wanted, but as a very former Erasmus student, one of the first, I was a pioneer, I know how much it contributes to the culture, the mobility scheme, especially for youth. We wanted to know, when I was a minister, I said I wanted to multiply by 10 the Erasmus money. We are not there yet, but certainly there's also the fact that we have increased and we got 2.2 billion euro for Erasmus. It is another element which is very important in this picture, in our commitment for culture. But I mean, the point is that we must bet on our new renaissance, very much on culture, looking at the ecological transition, looking at the digital transition, looking at the challenge of competitiveness. All these aspects have something, a possible golden thread for our European, our added value to the world, which is culture. And also from this perspective, I agree with what you're saying, that culture allows us to go beyond the traditional political cleavages. I think also that we have to better protect culture. I mean, I hope that all the member states will be quicker to implement, for example, the copyright directive, because to protect copyright and to protect creation in this new phase is another
point well made.
Another step ahead. So I mean, a message of hope from this part of Europe, and full support to you and to the work, the excellent work that in the Culture Committee my colleagues have played, and the work that we all together must do in the days and weeks ahead of us. Let me say that we have also a fundamental issue of culture, which is fundamental rights. Rule of law and fundamental rights are part of European civilization. And this is why we have to continue to pretend that the new money, the fresh money, the recovery plan, the budget for the next years is given to those who respect fundamental values. This is the biggest contribution of us Europeans to the world civilization. And I agree with Sabine Verheyen. If you don't violate rule of law, you don't have anything to fear when it comes to respect a principle of rule of law. So we must go ahead. There are 3 countries who are trying to block, but I think that we will win this battle. And it is also important because it's also a cultural, a democratic battle we are fighting for everybody in Europe.
Sandra, it was so good to hear from you, and make, for you to be so positive, optimistic, and hopeful. And I think that people need to hear that. And also the same message, I suppose, to our audience is that, those of you who are based in Italy or elsewhere, power to the elbow of Sandra and others to actually lobby, not lobby in the best way, I mean, make sure they've got the ammunition they need to make sure that they're able to make the argument. I have only got 5 or 6 minutes left on this particular chapter, but I do want to be able to bring in a couple of questions that people have raised on Zoom. One, we have Nancy, and Nancy von Breskes talks about the fact that there are many individual freelancers and in the sector, and how can you help them? How can the politicians of this cultural deal and the governments help them? And then we have a question from Cornelius Holthoff, UNESCO Chair on Heritage Fund, and raising the issue about culture is also about shared values, effective integration, etc., and human well-being. And how will the additional aspects inform the cultural deal for Europe? That these elements that he's referring to that are often forgotten. The point I was making earlier about actually culture and arts can underpin the cultural identity or the political identity of Europe by respecting and reflecting its values. I want to bring in both Sabine and Tara to make some final comments in relation to some of those points.
I start then, Tara, for the last
Indeed,
word.
Sabine, absolutely, yes.
So I think what is very important is to always to have in mind that the added value of culture for Europe is such huge and its core, because if we want to transport messages, if we want to bridge the differences between the people living in Europe, between the different European nations, between the different groups of people, between a left wing, right wing, center, traditional or more future oriented. We need culture. We need the exchange. We need the possibility to transport different points of view, different messages, also via instruments of culture. But what we need at the moment, most importantly, is that we have a unified cultural sector. I know that the cultural sector is very diverse. We have individuals, but to really show the power of culture, we need common actions, we need a common approach, we need a common lobbying for the cultural sector, we need data, we need collaboration and cooperation. And I want to give you one positive example. When we were fighting for the cultural sector a few years ago for copyright, we had this unique approach. The sector stood together for the cultural, for their right of intellectual property. And if we can organize again such a common approach, such a common initiative to get respected, not just by the ministers of culture, but like Niklas also said, in the regions, in the administrations that are elaborating the concrete plans for implementing of the programs, with the ministers for economy and finance. And I think there we don't have to convince our cultural ministers. They are on our side.
Indeed.
But we have to convince the ministers of economy and the ministers of finance that it is worth to invest in this sector. And this sector is valid and important for the whole recovery of the European Union, not just for the cultural recovery, but also for all the other sectors, because it's the glue, like it was said at the beginning. Thank you.
Sabine, thank you. And thank you for making that point, because actually it's a recurrent theme here, is about actually how can we ensure that the cultural arts sector is unified, singing from the same hymn sheet and banging the same drum. And there's a metaphor here in terms of what happened in the first lockdown, where you witnessed how arts and culture took hold of communities across the piece, with the singing, with the banging, with, you know, that sense of oneness and togetherness. And actually we need to see that happening across the piece. But the other point you're making is, you're absolutely right. It's not the cultural ministers that you're trying to convince, it's the finance and others, and who actually, let's not forget, who are a product of our culture and arts scene in Europe, but also who've consumed it. Their families do, their children do, and a wider community does. It's actually bringing that home, that they wouldn't be the kind of person they are if arts and culture hadn't played a part in their own formation and their development of their personality and identity and wider. Tara, over to you for the last points about those issues around, unified front on this, and moving forward in a steel march in a way across Europe, where you really trumpet the importance of arts and culture.
Yes, of course. I think that what we had to see right now, but not but mostly in the last year, is that the cultural sector, it's mobilizing, it's unified. So we have been talking and we have been working together with the biggest networks, and not only with the networks, but also with trans-European organizations, making the pleas for this recovering fund, the earmarking of the recovery fund, but even we started the year working together with the cultural networks regarding this working conditions for artists and cultural workers. And this, maybe I want to link this to the question on the freelancers. I think I was mentioning this before, but I think that we need really to impose this statutes of the artists. If we don't have this official recognition and strictly and specific policies that protect and recognize the work of artists and cultural workers, so we will not be not even respected for trying to start a dialogue with other ministries and other policy fields. So we need this proper recognition at the EU level of the status of the artists and creators, because then I think then we could at least be recognized as agents to be active in the dialogues in any conversation. So this is for me very, very crucial.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you both. I now need to move on to chapter 2, but thank you all. And all of this obviously is being collected, and we've got the it's live streamed, and we know that this is being recorded and kept for posterity. But there's that resounding message of a unified voice. The issue around, as you just said, Tara, about recognition, but there's something about what Nicholas said about the need for him and other politicians to feel the weight of your voice and the power of your desire for change in and around them, but also that interesting point that he made around, and Sandro, both about the importance to the European identity, but also creating a welfare net that also is inclusive of the arts and cultural sector and those who are practitioners within it. Thank you all for that first chapter. I want to ask Mena, our resident illustrator, what have you made of that in terms of a visual image? I'm really curious. Let's show what you've done. Hello.
Hi. I am about to share my screen.
Thank you.
Let me see if that works. Are you guys seeing my screen right now?
Not as yet. There we go.
All right. So this is the visual up until now. It's a bit blurry, but I'm going to show you a time lapse anyway. So this is what I've done so far. Well, this is the part where I write all the names. That's not very interesting. There you go. So there's your head.
Thank you for that.
What you're watching now is your intro.
Yeah.
And in a few seconds, you're going to see Sabine talking here in this corner. I'll zoom in a little bit. Talking about how to spend money, the, your conversation about the importance of art, but also the economic importance of art. Here we get another portrait of Tere.
Okay.
We have the pillars. We have, there's a singer to show the the importance of festivals. And this is where I'm at so far. I've just put some quotes together.
Perfect.
Thank you. As long as it's inspiring you.
Definitely, always.
Well done. Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you.
Thank you.
I now want to move on to chapter 2, which is about the role of philanthropy. What is the role of philanthropy in the new, let's say, the cultural deal for Europe? And in this particular chapter, I have both someone who's the chief of the European Cultural Foundation, but I also have a commissioner who has spoken boldly and loudly about the importance of this issue, Maria Gabriel. Maria Gabriel is also, it's a very warm welcome to you, Maria, to this discussion, and also one of our European young leaders at Friends of Europe. So Maria, I want to turn to you first. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, a warm welcome to you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Andre. Thank you.
Good, good. So, Maria, what I want to ask you is, what's your sense of how? I mean, you've done a number of amazing things in this, let's say, crisis period, where you've kind of mobilized a hackathon, you've mobilized communities to give, you've upped the ante around some of this discussion around culture and arts, Maria. So, in terms of the reaction to what you've heard so far, where do you stand currently on this? Because I'll turn to Andre in a moment in terms of the impact of the philanthropic euro in Europe in the culture and art space. It is significant, we know. I'll leave Andre to answer some of those issues around the percentages and the data, but it feels like there's a missing opportunity to combine and make the most of a partnership between public funding and philanthropic funding in a new way for the cultural deal and the recovery of Europe. Maria, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to start by thanking Tere from Culture Action Europe and Snezka from Europa Nostra for the organization of this event, because this is only the second edition to this La Rentrée, but I'm convinced, Snezka and Tere, that it will turn into an unmissable event, gathering all the stakeholders involved in the field of culture. And for this, I would like really to express all my congratulations. Well, President Sassoli said it very well. Culture is not a secondary aspect of our society. And I would like to start from here. Culture has always and will always be at the center of our lives. But now, to achieve a cultural deal for Europe, we need definitely first to recognize the importance of culture and therefore be sure that this is part of our recovery. That's why I listened so carefully to the previous speakers. Sabine Verheyen explained it very well in this first part of the discussion, because our work over the past months focused on this aspect. And before arriving to philanthropy, I think that it's very important just at least again to enumerate all these initiatives. First, we need to continue all to stay very mobilized, to speak with one voice, unified, to be united, to make sure that culture and creative sectors could benefit from all the horizontal instruments and financial support put forward at the beginning of the crisis. Second, including culture as beneficiary of the other European programs and initiatives beyond the initial ones, including REACT-EU, InvestEU, Digital Europe Cohesion Fund. Third, promoting the unique opportunity of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I can only here express again my strong support and thank you, the European Parliament, for their call to earmark for the cultural and creative sectors and industries at least 2% of the recovery and resilience facility. I fully support this proposal. Thank you very much, Sabine. But this is now up to all of us to promote this idea to our member states. I will do it in 2 weeks' time at the occasion of our informal video conference of the Ministers of Culture. Fourth, designing stronger instruments and creating synergies among themselves. Here, that was raised just before. I think of Creative Europe, Erasmus+, Horizon Europe, because especially for the first time in Horizon Europe, we have a new cluster dedicated to culture and cultural heritage. We'll have a new kick with the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. And now what I would like to say, thank you very much for the additional financial support European Parliament and the good news last week. That will be up to us to use this opportunity. But if you want a cultural deal for Europe, I think that we need to go beyond the inclusion of culture in the recovery. This means to rethink our interaction with the sector, with foundations like the European Cultural Foundation, to be able to support the sector in another way. The European Cultural Foundation, at the peak of the crisis, launched the Culture of Solidarity Fund, gathering philanthropic, public and private funding to support cultural projects. And from the beginning, I strongly supported this initiative, presenting it to the member states and the informal video conference of the Ministers of Culture on 18th of April, the first dedicated to the COVID-19 and its impact on the sector. And I will never forget the faces of our ministers. So we need to continue to be vocal and stay united. Outside of the European Union, foundations in many different domains are flourishing, and philanthropy is a tool regularly used. This is not the case for the time being in the European Union. And initiatives such as the Culture of Solidarity Fund are interesting, and we should definitely explore possible ways to support them, because alternative sources of funding can be extremely helpful. And on our side, looking especially and specifically at cultural heritage, the topic of alternative sources of financing is included in the work plan for culture for 2019-2022. Within this framework, beginning of next year, we'll hold together with member states a workshop on this topic. I think that we should seize the momentum, especially because, Snezhka, I see you, we are thinking about for the next steps already. Moreover, the Future Creative Europe program, although we are still finalizing the negotiations, specifically opened the door for increased synergies with other European funding programs to find additional funding solutions to the cultural and creative sector. We should address these too. And in this context, I'm willing to organize a dedicated workshop to explore this possibility. Philanthropy, however, last point, can only be one element of the cultural deal. To be complete, what is needed is the full engagement of our citizens. And this engagement will happen first by turning political initiatives into societal and cultural projects. The European Green Deal will only be possible if all our citizens will endorse it, understand it, and
exactly.
They don't see it as a threat, but they can see the European Green Deal as a driver. And only culture will be able to do this. The music sector has already started moving along this line with the Music Declares Emergency. I count on the other sectors to do the same, especially because we have now the proposal of the president for the new European Bauhaus initiative. Bridge between on one side science and technology, on the other art and culture. I will always pay attention, dear Sabine, that we should preserve the bottom-up approach. We need really here to involve our cultural and creative sectors. And I think that that means that we should pay attention to a second aspect, engaging with citizens directly.
Yes.
And here I'm thinking about the conference on the future of Europe. It's really time that we are playing an active role in this conference, because I can't imagine the future of Europe without culture, creative sectors, and all these extraordinary talents that we have. So I think that here we should really be more proactive. Why not? And I'm thinking of another new element. It's our missions in Horizon Europe program.
Exactly.
But
yes.
now the challenge is really how to share this information regularly and how to define common actions, and especially after to see how they can be implemented. So what I'm very glad here to share finally with you, that I fully believe that we need to integrate another level. It's the regional level. There is an important role to play by our regions. And that's why I'm so glad that together with President Tzitzikostas, we worked on a joint action plan for the next 2 years that will establish a list of 26 actions in 4 priorities areas. So you know me, culture will be one of those 4 areas, and that will be presented next week. So my plea is here, please pay attention to the initiatives that you'd like to propose and help us to realize them. So I will stop here, dear Andre, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Really, I look forward to hear our exchanges and to answer to your questions.
Maria, as ever, you know, in my experience of you is you've always come prepared, and you've always had a very clear sense of passion, and you're not just kind of giving us, you know, fluffy words. There's specific things that you are identifying, and it's good to hear that. And it's good that, you know, those are the audience. I hope we've noted it, and I hope that all the cultural institutions have tweeted this, the fact that you've agreed to hold a workshop, which is great, which is a very specific action. But if I may ask you, before I invite Andre in from the European Cultural Foundation, Maria, you know, I mean, from my previous experience of moderating with you on other occasions, whether that's to do with Africa or digital skills or etc., we have this sense of a Team EU approach. Say a little bit about whether you've got the back, or have your fellow college of commissioners got your back on this? You know, is there a sense that the passion you're demonstrating and communicating here is shared across the college? And the second point is that when you talk about the Conference of the Future of Europe, it feels like a, you know, dead duck. And say that with all respect, there's no sense of where it is and who's running it and what the plans are. And I obviously expect that, you know, the COVID environment and the crisis has put it off course, but there's, at least from our sense, there's no sense of what it is, what's happening and where it is. How do you involve people as a result? So Maria, back to you. Challenging questions, I know, but it's important.
Yes, that's exactly that. Team Europe approach, that means that since the beginning, by the very end, we are working together. That means that we need not only to create and identify synergies, but after to follow very closely the implementation together. Because when we talk about culture and creative sectors, yes, I'm responsible for Erasmus Plus, Horizon Europe. Good, we have here some very, very, very good instruments. But what's about the European Regional Development Fund? That's why since the beginning, I'm working together with Commissioner Ferreira. What's about the skills that we need really to equip our young people if you'd like to engage them in this extraordinary diversity of culture and cultural heritage? That's why we are working together with Commissioner Smith. The same, when I talked about our missions on climate change, I'm very glad that since the beginning, all the other commissioners supported this, especially because we were very clear in that the recommendations of our chair's board, culture is an integral part. So please pay attention to this. Now the question, it will be really the next only few months. We don't have so much time. First, of course, for me, it's to finalize the negotiations with the European Parliament, to be very clear, to have after our work program and to identify the main priorities. What I would like to see is that the next 6 months, we are able to show our capacity to have some, not 50, but 5 priorities that we are able to scale at European level. And I think that during the crisis, we have seen that is possible. I'm always thinking here about Creative Unite platform with more than 26,000 people registered, more than 600 contributions. First time in June that at this level we organized this. And first time that I have seen that the extraordinary diversity of the sector that not means that this is an obstacle to speak with one voice, to exchange practices and to advance together.
What about the Conference of the Future of Europe, Maria?
For the Conference of the Future of Europe, since the beginning, I'm in close contact with the Vice President of
No, I know, it's not about your communication. No, it's not about your communication. Where is it at? It feels like a dead duck, as I was saying. Is it still alive and kicking?
Absolutely, but there is some internal procedures and details where every institution is paying attention to this,
Okay.
but it's on a good way, and that will be definitely very soon started. I'm very glad that we already contributed with the voices of culture of young people. I'm thinking about citizens platforms with the Joint Research Center. We have an experience on this, and that was already taken on board, so I'm very glad. But we need to continue to insist that our voice matters and we have things to say important, because that's crucial for the future of Europe.
Thank you. Okay, I won't challenge you even further, but thank you for being direct and frank about some of these matters. And those of you on the audience, put on your comments in relation to the Conference on the Future of Europe. If you know where it's at, good for you. Then why don't you share that with others? And obviously, again, that's that consistent message about organize, engage, and as we've said, as Maria said, there are a number of challenges now in the next few months. How do you make sure that these three organizations were bringing this event together, but link back to you to make sure that that pressure is felt, but also that voice of reason around arts and culture? I want to now move on to Andre. Andre, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Super.
Welcome, warm welcome to you. So it's quite interesting to come on the back of what Maria's been saying, because actually that from someone who is steeped in a range of issues, is articulating very clearly the importance of the sector and what she needs, and a commitment to hold a workshop on taking some of this forward. What's your reaction? And say a little bit about what you think the power of the philanthropic euro is in this particular deal.
Okay, thank you. And I have to say the discussion beforehand on the cultural deal and the importance of the cultural sector has been very rich, and I congratulate my colleagues on that. So I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how we can make it happen. Not why we want to make it happen, but how we can make it happen. Mm-hmm. And we all agree these are extraordinary times. I'm basically a child of 89 when the Berlin Wall came down, and I thought this was my defining moment. And now I don't know whether it was, because these are even bigger, extraordinary times. And to be honest, Europe had a very slow and uncoordinated start. And in March, I actually was afraid that this could be Europe's Titanic moment. But after initial hesitation, the EU and the member states raised up to the challenge and agreed really, again, an extraordinary recovery package and funded by previously unimaginable Eurobonds. I mean, you talked about that. And I think these extraordinary times, they're also extraordinary times for extraordinary measures. And some of them were already mentioned also by Commissioner Gabriel and by President Sassoli and Ms. Verheyen. But I think that's why I think now this actually could be a European moment. And the European Cultural Foundation was created 65 years ago to create or help to promote a European sentiment, a European sense of belonging. And I think out of this crisis, after the initial hiccups, we could actually grow a European sentiment, a European moment of solidarity. But and that brings me to the issue of that Baustein 2, the second component of this session. How could that happen? And is that actually only something which we can rely on to the European Union and the member states? And I think that's not enough. And when Mr. Gozzi talked about the Renaissance and what came out of that in terms of the culture sector, it wasn't because governments had to intervene. It came out of civil society, it came out of the art sector, it also came out of philanthropy. And I think we are in this together. This is not just an issue for government. And that's why I believe it could be also, and it should be also, a citizens' moment, a European citizens' moment. That's what I see in this. And that brings me back to the European sentiment. So what can philanthropy do in this? you asked about the figures. Foundations in Europe spend a combined 60 billion euros per year, not counting the foundation's endowment. And around 43% of the EFC membership, the European Foundation Center membership, works in art and culture, representing an estimate 22 billion spent annually. Okay, you might say that's peanuts compared with the 750 billion that's now on the table. But this is money spent across Europe very locally, because most foundations work at a very local level, work in communes, in small cities, in villages, in rural regions. So this is an important part of the ecosystem. And Commissioner Gabriel mentioned how we, as the European Cultural Foundation, reacted. We created, for us, a very big fund, and we got other European foundations to be part of it, and that already in March. And many other foundations in Europe have reacted in a similar way, often at a very local level, especially also in places like Italy, in Portugal, in Southern Europe, and that has been great. I think because of that, because of what the commissioner was saying, what the president was saying about what the EU is doing, what the EU is planning, and what I have been saying about the role of the philanthropy, if we manage to combine these things, coordinate these things, align these things in a good way, then we can achieve much more, and maybe even in the context of a next Renaissance. Also, I have to be a bit careful, because why should we just replicate the Renaissance or the Bauhaus if we can invent something totally new, a real European thing, for a starting point European, and not just a rerun of what we had hundreds or 100 years ago. So that's what I really have in mind, and I want to see how we can make that happen. The commissioner has talked about the things we can do, about the workshop. We have, to be honest, found it hard to find a way to combine these resources. And despite the commissioner's a big speech before the culture ministers and many other efforts, it's still tricky to get its way through the discrete charm of the bureaucracy. And I also not only mean the EU bureaucracy, I also mean foundations bureaucracy. So how do we combine these things in a good way? That is my question. And we are open to this as a European Culture Foundation. We will publish a study this week together with the Allianz Kulturstiftung on how we can actually grow out of this crisis a real European philanthropy. I mean, a philanthropy with a European purpose, and what could be the role in the workings with the European Union. We have in mind a European public philanthropic matching fund, but there are all sorts of other ways of achieving this. The question is how we can do it. We are open. We think there's a lot of potential, and I think it is actually needed, because this cannot just be a government moment. This has to be a citizens'
absolutely,
and a moment where everyone comes together, because you know, only this way we can make it.
Absolutely. And there's something about philanthropy adding value to the broader society, and its role being independent and being able to really support in a way without not many strings attached, in a way that gives, you know, breathes life into community and individuals, and be able to do a number of things. But you gave some interesting figures there. Very briefly, if you may, because I want to bring in some reactions, is that knowing the sector that you do, the philanthropic sector in mainland Europe, continental Europe, what chance do you think you have of bringing them together around this? Because we've heard constantly that we need a unified march. You know that actually there is the potential for the philanthropic sector in Europe to perhaps provide seed corn funding to be able to mobilize communities. And even having worked in the UK as head of a very large funder, one of the things that we did was create social impact bonds. I've never seen a social impact bond which has obviously been used on things like recidivism, Green Deal, childcare, but on culture. And I wonder what if you know, Europe could be a first in creating a social impact bond, which matches philanthropic money, private sector money, and public money in a way that creates more sustainability to the monies that we're talking about right now. Just a quick reaction to that thought, Andre.
Well, on the first one, it's funny that you mention it. You know, the European Culture Foundation is based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And when the first discussion about the recovery package and potentially using bonds was raised, and then there was a group called the Frugal Four, apparently they're now Frugal Five, who said, no, we can't do that. And we at that point had the idea to create Eurobonds. So the European Cultural Foundation creating a cultural Eurobonds. But then we looked into it. For us, it wasn't the right way. It needs foundation with a bigger endowment. But the philanthropic sector is actually open to it, and it is discussed. For example, in the US, there's a consortium of foundations who are working on bonds as a measurement, as a way of addressing this crisis, but also for the future. And I think there's a discussion also within the philanthropic sector to do similar things. And I think it's only an indication that everything is on the table. This is such a crisis that you have to be creative to get out of it. And you won't do it by doing rerunning things which you have done before. You have to step out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
That's what the philanthropic sector is currently doing.
Great, good to hear.
Whether it's other means. And that's where also comes to the issue of philanthropic public partnership. It's not something which foundations line up to do naturally. Because they will have to agree on something. There must be compromise. But when there is such a statement, and this statement also comes from the European Foundation Center and Daphne, the network of national foundation centers, then it's really because they think this is a particular time and it needs to be done. And I think it's a good sign. It doesn't mean that everything has to be centralized. It only means that you have to have vehicles where it is possible to combine it. And these vehicles exist to a certain extent at regional level already. Some of them also at national level, also then it's becoming a little bit more thin. And now we are talking how we can use this particular moment in time, this crisis, as an opportunity to create also these kind of vehicles in a positive manner, not only for the crisis, but also for beyond.
Absolutely, Andre. And as you say quite rightly, you know, if social systems around communities are falling apart, the philanthropic euro will be in greater need, but actually its impact will be low. And it's actually, historically, what it's been able to do is fill gaps, not necessarily to do what the job of the public sector is, but be able to provide that essential glue. But if that framework is gone, that's where there's that wake up moment for philanthropy to think about alternative solutions. And I suppose one of my frustrations is the private sector and the public sector together create these financial vehicles very quickly and are very savvy and smart on them. And it's about time, perhaps, the cultural sector and the financial sector, I mean, the philanthropic sector needs to perhaps think out of the box and use these kind of financial tools more creatively. And I'll bring back Maria to see what she thinks about that. I'll take two very quick reactions. We have Giuliano de Empoli. Giuliano?
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very briefly, if I can get a reaction from you to what you've heard so far, you've been involved in this. You're based in a think tank. You've been author. Let me get this right: 7 ideas for a European cultural recovery plan.
Well, thank you first of all for this very interesting discussion. I think since we're discussing about a cultural deal for Europe, it would be a good idea maybe to go back 1 second to the original New Deal. And I think what was so special about Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal in the 30s is not just that he decided to invest in culture, that he understood that if you wanted to open a new phase, a new era for the United States at that time and defeat national populist forces at that time that were very powerful, you didn't just need the serious subjects, you know, infrastructure policy and welfare state and all that stuff, but you also needed to involve the creative energies of the arts and culture. But what's more relevant, and I think less known, is the way he did it. You know, he didn't just put money into it. He changed the approach of funding the arts. And instead of just involving artists into like gentle, rhetorical, you know, nice projects about the American dream or making America great again or whatever, he didn't shy away from controversy. He funded projects and programs that were openly controversial and problematic. You know, it was the first slave narrative studies. It was the first studies of migration, about the condition of the original American Indians. It was all kind of issues that were problematic at the time. He kind of raised them and encouraged artists and creators to go into that.
So is that your point? Is that your point, that you want to bring in a different kind of ways of, it's not just the money, it's about how it's spent. So I need you to be brief because I need to move on.
I think it's about how it's spent. If you stay into the consensus, traditional European culture of, you know, Europe is good for peace and solidarity and all that stuff. And let's avoid controversy at any cost. Let's not put faces on those Euro notes. I think it's so much better that we start finding ways to enrich controversy and maybe put the wrong faces on the Euro notes and maybe, you know, fund all kinds of programs that are highly controversial instead. And this really implies changing the rules of engagement between the European Commission and private subjects. And that's where the philanthropy can be really important in pushing the boundaries.
The boundaries and be a spark of a different nature. Giuliano, thank you so much. Valuable, and it's also a good reminder of what happened with the original deal. And there is something there to be learned around. Actually, you need to be able to really upend some of these narratives by being brave, but as long as you've got the money behind you also too. I want to go quickly to Gijs van de Vries. Gijs, you've been a politician at both a national level in the Dutch government, you've been an MEP, you've been in the Dutch Audit Office, etc., and you're now at the European Institute at the LSE. Briefly, give us your reaction to what you've heard so far, given those various hats that you've had, and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I think we've just heard two very important contributions from Maria Gabriel and Andre Wilkens. Both of you have identified a huge strategic opportunity for Europe. Maria Gabriel has told us how she's working to tie culture in with other policy agendas so that it becomes more visible how important culture is for the greening of Europe. How culture can contribute to the digital agenda, how Europe can be part of the new skills package of Europe, and how culture can be part of Europe's international cooperation. All those are possibilities to put culture on the map politically and also in the thinking of people. And I think that's essential, because if culture is to fully flourish and contribute to fighting nationalism and inward-lookingness, it needs to be perceived as a relevant force, not just for the cultural sector itself, but for society as a whole. So 3 cheers to Maria. Anything we can do to support that broader cultural agenda, I think would be very valuable. And Andre, you've just outlined one way of doing that. It is by broadening the alliance of positive forces in Europe, tying culture and philanthropy together. Finding areas where the two can be mutually supportive for this positive agenda to counter the nationalism and negativity. One way of doing this, but there can be many, is to have a few thematic teams where philanthropy and culture can work together and support the EU agenda. Take, for example, I mean, this is just one example, the Sustainable Development Goals. All our countries have accepted to implement them, but implementation is slow. and the role of culture is yet to be developed. So what we can do is take, for example, the theme of education, arts education. What can philanthropic organizations and cultural organizations jointly do to support European and global arts education with the support of the EU? Then you hit two nails on the head. You strengthen Europe's agenda, you make Europe more visible in the world, and you contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So two very important contributions, and I very much look forward to the rest of this discussion.
Thank you, Riza. It's very, very helpful and good to have that applaud for what both our key contributors were saying. I want to invite Maria Gabriel, but as you come in, because I know you're going to be having to leave very soon, Maria, is that we had a question also from Harry Verhaven about how do you make sure that member states can commit part of their budget to this kind of bold ambition? What is this bold ambition actually, what is it about, is the question that he's saying, but how do you make sure that, you know, it does flow in through at member state level? So some difficult issues being raised, obviously, from our Zoom audience. But Maria, over to you for some concluding remarks and reactions to what we've heard so far. And it's extremely important that, I suppose, the element of Harry's point was about the importance of digitalization in the sector, and how do you create that transition? Because a lot of conversation about digitalization across society in terms of both whether it's to do with energy, health, etc. That's the true also of the arts and culture sector. And I want to apologize to people that I can't take all your questions, but Maria, before you go, if you can respond to some of the things you've heard, that would be really helpful.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, very pragmatically, alone, I can't convince our member states to do all this, what we are discussing today.
That's right.
But if we are acting as one, if we are speaking with one voice, we have more chances. That means, Andre, that it's important why and how, but above all, it's more important that everyone has a role to play in this process. Who else talk about the culture of solidarity fund in front of ministers? I don't know. How to organize our next steps? Definitely, we need to change our approach. We need to consider culture as strategic investment. And I think that we need really to work on a common narrative, because maybe it's not easy to convince our member states that it's important to earmark 2% in the recovery and resilience facility. But with synergies with the other sector, we can really personalize, and at the same time, by promoting a general approach, our contribution to the different member states in order to bring them together. For one of them, it's digital, the most important. For other, it's regional development fund. For other, it's the social cohesion fund. But we didn't have this work out until now. That's why for me, it was so important that in the previous month, and that was not visible, a lot of work was done with the other commissioners in order this time, not only to talk about synergies, but to implement them, because that's not the case. What I discovered with my first conversation with Elisa Ferreira, is that it doesn't work. So this time we need to be sure. And that's why I would like really to stay very, very focused on that. We need to identify what we have as a real added value, to stay very concentrated with a particular responsibility and role for everyone. And from the local to regional, national, and European level, speak with one voice and stay very concentrated on concrete things.
Maria, thank you very much. I know you need to go, but thank you for joining us. Good to see you again. And again, as I said, it's heartening to have someone who doesn't pull their punches and direct about what the challenges ahead, and people have heard you. And I think the audience will react and also listen to what you've said and the offer you've made. And I think it's now a case of how we up the ante and make it happen, as we say. And therefore, on that note, thank you both. Andre, thank you also for your contribution. And I want to now move to our third chapter in our final half hour that we have available to us, which is very much about culture for the future of Europe. And in this is about looking at taking what we've listened to so far, but thinking about it in terms of how we move this forward. And I'm very pleased, firstly, to welcome through a video message, Clément Bon, who is a Minister of State in France and also happens to have been one of our European young leaders at Friends of Europe. And so here's a short video from Clément before I invite Snezka to react to what he has to say.
Bonjour, je suis très heureux d'être avec vous parce que je m'occupe d'Europe et je suis viscéralement attaché et totalement convaincu que c'est par la culture que nous ferons avancer le projet européen, que nous donnerons envie d'Europe et puis surtout que nous serons fidèles à un héritage parce que bien sûr la culture européenne a précédé l'Europe institutionnelle. C'est pour elle, c'est sur sa base que nous construisons notre projet de rapprochement européen. Il faut la célébrer, il faut la défendre. Il y a beaucoup d'initiatives européennes qui, depuis des années, dans des formats différents, font avancer notre culture commune ou révèlent notre culture commune. Je pense aux Journées du patrimoine qui sont nées en France il y a un peu plus de 30 ans et qui sont devenues des Journées européennes du patrimoine. L'attachement des Européens partout à leur patrimoine est un fondement essentiel de notre culture européenne que nous devons faire fructifier. Le travail en France de Stéphane Bern, celui que nous conduirons sous la présidence française de l'Union européenne, doit marquer cet attachement et je pense que nous avons là un fil qui traduit l'attachement des Européens à leur culture. Et puis nous devons défendre un modèle culturel européen qui dépasse la question du patrimoine, celle de la création, du spectacle vivant. Le modèle européen du droit d'auteur est évidemment essentiel, nous le défendons au niveau européen. Il est encore fragile, souvent attaqué, parfois remis en cause. Nous le défendrons, comme la France le fait depuis 3 ans, avec un acharnement bienveillant mais total pour que la création, l'information, la diversité culturelle européenne soient préservées et défendues dans le monde. Et puis je le disais, il y aura cette présidence française de l'Union européenne au premier semestre 2022, si importante pour nous, car elle sera un moment d'engagement européen encore plus fort. Et il faut qu'au cœur de cette présidence française, il y ait la culture, notre modèle culturel, notre identité européenne, pour défendre ces sujets, le droit d'auteur, la régulation du monde numérique, notre patrimoine, pour imaginer ensemble, et je compte sur vous, sur vos idées, sur votre engagement jamais démenti, pour nous proposer des initiatives politiques, des projets concrets qui pourront montrer ce lien essentiel, ce lien identitaire des Européens à leur culture partagée. Et puis un dernier mot pour dire que dans le moment que nous connaissons, celui parfois trop souvent des attentats terroristes, de la remise en cause de nos valeurs et au fond de notre culture, nous devons transmettre, éduquer, enseigner. C'est ce que la France porte par exemple au Conseil de l'Europe avec un observatoire de l'enseignement de l'histoire qui commence ces jours-ci et qui là aussi est le meilleur moyen face à l'obscurantisme, face à ceux qui tuent, face à ceux qui ne respectent pas la liberté, de défendre ce que nous sommes, une terre européenne, multiséculaire, de liberté, de création, de diversité ensemble. Merci beaucoup, bon courage, je compte sur vous et vous pouvez compter sur moi.
So there we hear from Clément again, some fine words. It's good to have those fine words, obviously, and for someone who plays quite a significant role, both politically in France, but also elsewhere, it's good to hear what he says. But what's your response to what you've just heard, Snezka? You're the Secretary General of Europa Nostra, also coordinating Heritage Alliance. What's your reaction to what you've just heard? And in the context of the opportunities that are ahead of us, we've heard so much. Tell us, what's your reaction to what you've heard so far?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, welcome.
The Hague in the Netherlands, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this essential debate. And I would like to react to what we have just heard, but if I can more general react to what we have been discussing. And of course, I must start by saying that it's so music to my ear, and I think to our ears here, to hear President Sassoli in his beautiful Italian and Minister Clément Beaune in his beautiful French, passionately speaking about the fundamental importance of cultural heritage for our Europe. So, you know, there is some hope, though we are living dark times, but I find that there are some very positive development that we are seeing, because I still remember Dharmendra 1 year ago, when we had our first La Rentrée, Culture Action Europe, European Cultural Foundation, Europa Nostra. You remember, at that time, we were fighting to have culture in the title.
Absolutely.
Gabriel. And
well remembered.
where we have come sort of in this 1 year time. We had Commissioner Gabriel with culture in her title, but in such a passionate way, in such a competent way, and engaged way, promoting, basically, she was promoting the cultural deal for Europe. And Sabine Verheijen, who fought like a lion together with so many members of the European Parliament, and some of them were speaking today, in order that in this unprecedented crisis, we also seize that and say that this is an unprecedented opportunity for finally putting culture and cultural heritage where it belongs. And it belongs at the heart of the European project. And I think all the speakers were saying that. So it's not only us from the cultural world, but the political leaders who were with us together were passing this message. So I would say that in unprecedented momentum and unprecedented mobilization, precisely because of the gravity of the crisis we are living. And that crisis is not just caused by COVID virus. It is caused by some very dangerous other types of viruses that are undermining the fundamental values of the European project and of our society. And these will be even more difficult to eradicate than the coronavirus. So that means that, and many speakers were saying about that the sort of speaking about a catalytic power, a healing power even of culture and cultural heritage, as a glue, social cement, that was what the President Sassoli said. So many people in a very eloquent way say, why today we need a cultural deal for Europe, and why culture and cultural heritage is in fact so important for the future of Europe, not just the recovery from the pandemic, but in general for the further march of this extraordinary project. We are now 70 years after the adoption of the Schuman Declaration. 70 years later.
Exactly.
Time. This is our moment. This has to be our moment. Andrew was asking for that. We are not asking anything what is too bold or undue. It is something which is an evidence, and it's something that ought to have been done many decades ago. But okay, there is always a time to do it, and I think this is the time has come to do it. We have also the heritage, and then this call for unification. That was such a strong. Everybody was.
Indeed, it was. Yes.
And that was a very, and I think what we are doing here, and what we started 1 year ago, Culture Action Europe, European Cultural Foundation, Europa Nostra, with the entire European Heritage Alliance, precisely we are showing we are doing the homework. We are ready for it. We are ready to unify. Not, you said, to sort of what you said, to play on one drum. I don't think we are going to play on one drum. I think we are going to be a fascinating chorus, or a fascinating
excellent, even better.
Extraordinary body with all their timbres, varieties, instruments, but in some kind of orchestrated, coordinated way, very, very coming with a music, extraordinary, inspiring music, and Europe needs that now more than ever. So why? We know why, and Hers de Vries said something that I want to say, among many other things which was said about why. I like to say why, because we are an antidote to all sorts of nationalism, populism, totalitarianism. This is what we need, and that's why we cannot just combat that with investment in economy. And the whole process of reunification of Europe was too much, for far too long, market-driven, and not enough value-driven and culture-driven. And that's why we have now the cases that Hungary, Poland, and Slovenia are blocking for the time being the budget. But that's why we need. That means it is so vital, it's so existential for the future of Europe to put culture and cultural heritage and the force behind. Because I'm here just a spokesperson, a spokeswoman of a formidable force. And many of our colleagues are in the audience now, and the others are working for our cause, even through digital means and even in the middle of a lockdown. We have done that 6 months ago in the middle of the first lockdown with Europeana and other colleagues from the European Heritage Alliance, where we adopted on the 9th of May, Europe Day, a manifesto saying heritage is a powerful catalyst for the future of Europe.
Okay.
It's not only the question of sort of saving us, it is a question of using that positive power of the culture and cultural heritage in order to contribute to that fundamental transformation, green transformation, digital transformation, the whole resilience, so many other things. It can't
Absolutely
be done without us.
Śnieżka, I love your passion and your sense of, you're rabble rousing the troops and saying, yes, we can do this, which is, I think, people need to hear that, and people need to have that sense of optimism. And these are my words, but not yours, in terms, I love, my paraphrasing is that actually this moment and what the sector represents is not about saving the sector, but actually it's about saving the idea and the beautiful idea of what Europe is and can be into the future. And I think we do not recognize that enough, that actually arts and culture plays that lightning rod for maintaining this very diverse, glorious sense of European identity, but actually protecting the notion of the European idea for what it's actually about. So thank you for that. I want to bring in a couple of reactions because I'm running out of time, unfortunately, and I need to wrap up at 5. So I've got a reaction first from Luca. Luca, you've been previous vice president of the Economic and Social Committee. What's your reaction to what you've heard so far? What are your kind of words of reflection or wisdom in relation to this particular discussion that we're having? Luca, over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be again with so many friends. I will not quote anyone, but there are so many friends in this panel. And I want to say 3 things as reaction. The first is I want to come back a little bit about the concept of Renaissance, as Agnieszka and Sabine knows very well, and also André. When I started my presidency of DSE in April, I use the title of my program, Renaissance, making this joke between the Renaissance and the EU. And I think that we should understand very well the 4 part of the Renaissance that also Sandro Gozzi has quoted. It was not only a matter of art and culture strictly defined. It was from one side art, and from the other side was a positive trust in the role of science. The synthesis was Leonardo, the man of science and of art in all in sense. But third, this has happened also through 2 vehicles. There was the merchant and the bankers. So concrete civil society, economic actor of that time that has allowed this new idea to reach every corner of Europe and mix with others. And fourth, have found in a specific political constituency the way to become reality. That were the cities, so the local government. If we do not understand the Renaissance as the product of these 4 elements, we are completely missed. So today we need the same. We were convinced of this 2.5 years ago when we were working for the European election, and we have to counteract to the raising of sovereignist. We were convinced when Ursula von der Leyen, the new legislation started with a new impressive force and a new idea of renewal of a new pact for Europe. We should be more and more convinced today after the pandemic, because we need this force. And the second concept will start exactly from some that you, Agnieszka, were saying, and with a very appreciated diplomatic mood, Sabine was saying at the very end of her speech. Yes, we have a problem. We have reunified the markets in this Europe. We have thought we have reunified the constitution and the democratic asset. Now we discover that is not, but we never unified the memories. What people think about their identity, what people
lovely
about their heart, about their past, their present, their future. This was exactly one of the starting points of my presidency. I started in Krakow with a seminar first in Jagiellonia and second we went to Auschwitz, exactly to see we had to restart from another part of Europe, not the usual suspect, not Rome, Florence, Paris, Berlin, or Brussels. We have to start this process. And to do this, to build up a new European memory as a mix of the real diversity of memory, of concept of the 27 member states, and perhaps tomorrow with all the Balkans, 30, 32 or more, we need culture. Culture is what will allow us to pass over this break on the fundamental values that formally we agreed, subscribing the Article 2 of the treaty, but finally we do not feel by heart. And on this, I see that the president of the Committee of the Region is still online, or was online. And I remember the one joke that his predecessor, Karl-Heinz Lamberts, was used to say. He was saying that as humans are composed by three constitutive elements, also our social bodies are the same. We have a mouth, we have a head, and we have a heart. So we can live even without enough food for our mouths. And that's the economy, that's the social fabric. We can live with some problem in our head, in our mind, but we cannot live without an heart. Because it's the heart that makes sense to everything and give a perspective, give a passion, put together what we are.
Okay.
And this is true in our reality where we are in Europe, and is more than true today. And last but not least, we have also to think very close to the role of culture when provoked by two things that are in today dynamics that we are living. The first is education. I know that in Europe there are very different situations now for education, but in large part of our country, we have done two things facing the pandemic. We have condemned the elders to die. Half the people died were elder people in the residence for older, and we have closed the school. So we have closed our youth from confined in our houses in front of a computer, of a smartphone, of a tablet, of a TV, of a PlayStation, cut from any other part. And when they have access to the instrument, when they can be in touch with school that is not only technicality, but is more about culture. And we already see, as the OCDE has already demonstrated, the enormous cost that will represent on them. OCDE has estimated that this lockdown for the student will cost for them a loss of 3% on their revenue during all their life, for the impact that will have on what they are. So we need culture to rebuild this in the long term. And last but not least, I think that culture is a driver of innovation, is a larger driver of innovation. I think Agnieszka, to the Turing Papyrus platform that you awarded just a few weeks ago. So this Egyptian museum, something very old, if you can say, that is put online with the newest technology, 6,000 or 7,000 recomposed papyrus, 36,000 fragments of papyrus, given by free to all the world. And the second, we are discussing about artificial intelligence as one of the drivers of the future of Europe. But the issue is how to maintain human in command of this artificial intelligence and not to give technology the command. But so we need humanism, ethics, or as the President Sassoli were saying, poetics in the discussion. In the discussion, to rebalance and to create, produce the rules, the habits.
Indeed.
The relation to maintain human in command of this evolution. So we need this also for the highest driver of the revolution of industry, technology, and society of tomorrow.
Luca, always a pleasure to listen to you.
I'm
Thank
closing
you.
here because you know my passion. But
Absolutely, I do. And it's good to hear you, really. I love the way you set out some of those issues, and it'd be good to see what kind of reactions, but I am running out of time, so don't mean to be rude, but I need to bring in some other people. I also want to bring in Guillermo D'Oliveira Martins. You're the administrator at the Gulbenkian Foundation. Apologies if I've pronounced that wrongly, but good to hear from you. You're a very significant, renowned foundation. What's your reaction to what you've heard so far? And a warm welcome to you.
Well, culture means solidarity, means citizenship. That's why it's very important the enthusiasm of Snezhka, all we heard from the different intervenants. COVID-19 gave us an opportunity of understanding an ethical and cultural dimension of humanity. That's why we need a new concept of cultural heritage. Cultural heritage counts for Europe. And we need to understand that is a complex and reality very, very fundamental, because it's tangible and intangible reality, nature, landscape, technology, digital world, but also innovation and creativity. That's very, very important, because we are in a very strange time. But we need to prepare our next future with human beings, with dignity, with education, with culture and science. That's why it's important to invoke here Leonardo and the spirit of Leonardo. We are preparing the Portuguese presidency of European Union.
Indeed.
In the next semester.
That's right.
Why we think it's important to have a clear engagement of culture and a clear engagement of the spirit of innovation and the new spirit concerning the culture as citizenship. Thank you very much. And
Guillermo, thank you. Before you go, because
yes.
I think that everyone's looking forward to, we've had the German president, everyone's looking forward to the Portuguese presidency. What role will you be playing as you're one of the established, long-standing foundations, both in your own home country, but across Europe and the world? What role will you be playing specifically in this regard for the presidency, so that our people can, understand how to engage?
Yes, we will have different initiatives, mainly concerning the role of women in the future of Europe, the role of science, the role of art, and the role of education. That's why it's very, very important to have this kind of solidarity during this new moment of the European history. And we must understand that we all count on this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for responding to that so effectively. I want to go back to Snezhka to react to what you've heard. And I've got quite a number of questions actually that I won't be able to take the fullness of, but I'll come back to after you've been able to respond to some of the issues that you've heard so far.
Thank you so much. I think I first want just to make a point, because it has been so apparent that we are so much more than a sector. We are a vector. And I think I'm quoting Gijs de Vries once, he said that. Vector for so many goals, so many priorities in terms of policies from the European Union. And we have to act accordingly with a little bit of more audacity and self-confidence that we represent so much more, of course, a sector, but also a vector. And because of that, also in that conference, because I would like to say something about the conference for the future of Europe, though you said perhaps it's a dead duck. I hope it's not. But that's why perhaps let's call it a mobilization for the future of Europe, whether there was a conference or anything else. But we can play a role, not just that we can bring our voices into that conversation and mobilization for the future of Europe. We also have meaningful places that we can offer for the debate on the future of Europe. Very often, as you know, in Brussels, there are so many conference hall without any soul, without any inspiration. President Sassoli called for poetics. We need for more beauty, inspiration, so we can all encourage heritage sites all over Europe, theaters, music hall, musea. They can open their doors and places when we are going to be able to meet again, physically or digitally, like we are doing now, to have a fundamental discussion, an inspired and enlightened discussion about la Renaissance de l'Europe, so dear to my friend Luca. And for all that, we need alliances. And that is why it's fantastic to see also the world of foundations like the Gulbenkian with the European Cultural Foundation, the philanthropy words coming together. We have the work with the presidency. We have the offer already. The French presidency in 2022 and with the Portuguese presidency wants to work with us. And we have the G20. Italy is going to chair the G20 for the first time. Culture will be a subject. There will be a culture minister meeting for the very first time of the G20. So something is moving. We have to seize that opportunity and momentum. And because of that also, last but not least, because I know that we will have a very important also speaker at the end, President of the Committee of the Regions, Apostolos Titsikostas, the role of regions and cities. When we talk about alliances and partnerships, how not to tap into the formidable energy that we have in regions and cities, and all of them are defined by their culture and their heritage in all its diversities, but also that's something that build bridges can help to build bridges and connect Europe in a much more harmonious and positive way.
Thank you again for that passion, but also you're very clear and you set out the opportunity, almost a pathway of opportunity ahead of us, which I think is quite really helpful for everybody concerned. Thank you for that. And before I turn to our significant speaker who's concluding some of this conversation, there are a number of questions that have been asked around cultural participation. How do you get the voluntary sector that supports communities to engage more in EU funding or access it? What's the issue of monetizing digital access? At the moment, a lot of that digital access has been free. Is there ways in which you can monetize that so you can upend the sector? What about the role of culture and arts as a part of EU's external relations plan? Because we've known historically how culture and arts have formed a part of selling EU abroad. It's part of the soft diplomacy rather than the hard diplomacy. But it actually is an important issue, but also, as others have mentioned, there's a tourist element, but there's actually about the selling, the external relations of the idea of Europe through culture and arts. And finally, quite interestingly, as on the cusp of Brexit, we have a question about what role can the UK play in this particular debate as they toddle off, potentially, of the European Union. So those are some of the questions that have been raised. I now want to take reactions to some of that, but also invite Apostolos to come in and join me in this conversation now. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you, a warm welcome. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Over to you to react to some of the points that you've just heard. And thank you for
very
being
much
with us.
Thank you, dear Snežka, dear members of the European Parliament, President, Chairwoman. Dear friends, it's a real pleasure for me to participate in this conference and endorse your call for a cultural year for Europe, and of course for ensuring a central place for culture in our post-pandemic future, promoting culture and the cultural diversity of our local, regional, national, and European identities and common European cultural heritage is also one of our political priorities at the European Committee of the Regions. It is in our shared interest to ensure culture will be one of the driving forces in the post-pandemic recovery. So as local politicians, we definitely recognize the importance of cultural and creative sectors, not only for the local and regional economies, but allow me to say also for the cohesion and the social life of our communities. Because unfortunately, as our recently published regional barometer confirms, the cultural sector is one of the hardest hit by the pandemic and continues to suffer severe financial and job losses. So in response, many local governments and municipalities arts councils and foundations have put in place emergency initiatives and compensation measures to support the sector. From our side, the Committee of the Regions created an online platform, and this is very important, to share some of these inspiring good practices. So I really welcome you to visit it and contribute to it. You can enter through our website to this platform. But we must continue to call for more support to culture and the cultural sector from the European Union and national funding instruments. The Next Generation EU must earmark a share to culture and its recovery to be implemented via the national recovery and resilience plans. We also advocate for the mainstreaming of investment in culture in all relevant EU funds, and we must also actively search for synergies between culture and other policies, such as tourism, regional policy, education, research. Our committee's priorities for the relaunch of the sector will be expressed in more detail in our upcoming own initiative opinion, restarting of culture and creative sectors, which is to be adopted in February 2021.
Okay.
So dear SNESCA, dear conference partners and participants, I'm really optimistic that by working together, culture will be an important driver in the recovery of Europe. We can clearly notice how cities and regions that invest in culture today capitalize on their cultural heritage, harness their history, tell their stories, renew and reimagine themselves, can create more space for creativity and innovation. They become more attractive, not only to their inhabitants, but also to tourists and to relevant economic activities, as well as for other businesses. This also promotes, allow me to say, an intergenerational and intercultural understanding in our societies that are increasingly multicultural. So in this context, I would like to celebrate the cultural features Europeans share and highlight how culture can reinforce our multiple and complementary identities, local, regional, national, and European, as well as promote intercultural tolerance and understanding. I really believe that our common culture,
good to hear,
cultural heritage can serve to strengthen the core European values that we share. So thank you very much.
Apostolos, thank you. Thank you for those words. And I think it's important for the audience to hear this. And absolutely important that you're here. And I think that what you suggested about what's going to happen in February is important. But I think between now and then, I think this group of people who are the three, if you call the cultural bandits, have come together to create this space, to have this conversation. But also the people on the audience will count on you, but also engage you in the next steps as we move forward. But thank you very much for being with us. It's very much appreciated. And we will come back to you. Thank you very much. I want to now just get a poll, all of you in the audience. There's a question that we'd like to ask you, so it's just coming up now. And you can, I hope you can all see it. And it's fairly straightforward. It's a yes, no, or I can't quite see with my eyesight, unfortunately. No opinion, basically. So, can we count on your support for the European cultural community deal when we propose a cultural deal for the EU and the institutions? So can we count on your support from your community for this new cultural deal for Europe? My eyesight's obviously very poorly. My apologies for that. So fill that in. It's just a yes, no, or no opinion. It's not a political statement, but it will give us a sense of the mood and whether, as Śnieżka, Tara and Andrea said, there's an opportunity here and we've heard from our politicians, they're actually looking for mobilization of community behind them. They want to see a greater force for their endeavors as they move forward. So I invite you to complete that. And so whilst that's being completed, I'd like to just invite Sabine very quickly to say a few words. Are you still there? I might have lost you. Hi.
Now you can hear me?
I can indeed. Thank you very much.
So perfect.
I've now lost you. You've gone back on mute.
Now.
That's it. That's better. Thank you very much.
Perfect. I would like to say thank you very much for this wonderful discussion we had today. I think the different aspects showed very clearly that culture is core for the European development and especially core for the European recovery, especially after COVID-19. Working together, working into the same direction with the different voices and different drums and different instruments we have, I think is one of the most important issues for the next years. We have to work on each level, on the local, the regional, the national, and the European level, to bring culture to the center of European politics and to the center of European recovery. We can do that with different instruments of support, of promotion. And I think the most important thing is that with this engagement in culture, we build the bridges that are necessary to set up a European Union with values, with humanity, and with economical strength.
Sabine, thank you. And thank you. As you know, your name has been taken consistently like the others, but you've clearly been a champion that's important inside the political system. Thank you for that, and thank you for your continued support. And it's going to be an upward hill struggle, given where we find ourselves, especially with regard to some of our partners in the East, Poland, Hungary. I know that you will need all your wits about you, and you need all that energy to continue to make sure this happens in the way that it does, not just for culture, but for other elements of how we make sure that conditionality works in the New Deal more broadly, but also reacts to citizens' needs and concerns as we move forward. I now hopefully will have the poll results that we can show. Let's see if this works. So, again, my eyesight is failing desperately here, but it says that we have over 90%, 95%, which is saying yes. And less than 5 with no opinion. So low, very low is the rest. But so therefore, the overwhelming majority of you are up for it, is what we hear, which is really important. I think that provides a sense of confidence and a belief in the partner organizations to do the right thing. But I suppose what you've also done is raise the stakes and to make sure that this association of cultural organizations come together and make sure they're able to build on the momentum and the enthusiasm you're demonstrating by being still here with us. And my apologies for running over time. But what I would like to say is that on the back of this, there will be a joint statement from the partners to this discussion and this second installment, which I'm sure there'll be another next year. But in terms of moving the momentum forward, there'll be a statement coming out on the 20th of November. And please do make sure you follow the hashtag Cultural Deal EU, which is important. I want to end, if I may, with back to our visual illustrator, Mena. Mena, what have you got for us before I finish off?
Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm going to be sharing my screen again. It's starting broadcast in 1 second. Is this working? Yes.
Great.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so this is the almost finished visual.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot, of course, that I wanted to take notes of, because so much interesting stuff has been said, and I've seen so many enthusiastic faces and house plants behind them. And let me see. I'll zoom in for a little bit for the last thing. So here you have Maria Gabrielle talking, then now, and then there's Andre Wilkins talking, Clement Bone.
Okay.
so much is going on. I can barely remember myself because I've been in such a
You've been in a zone, haven't you? I can tell you've been in a zone, and being able to kind of make sure you capture as much as you can.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. That looks again inspiring, interesting, thought-provoking, and I suppose captures, the breadth and complexity of this debate. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you once again for being with us, and much appreciated.
Thank you guys so much.
No, thank you. And we'll be able to share your visual in any case. Now, again, my apologies. I have run out of time, but I'm going to ask our three protagonists who've been involved in bringing this show to you, Tere, Andre, and Snezka. If I can ask you all three to give me 60 seconds max. Tere.
Oh, 60 seconds, okay.
Sorry.
I think it's clear that cultural dimension must be included in shaping these future challenges. And this includes specific investments, social awareness, and political willingness, and a cultural ecosystem that is alive. That's why we need to invest now. And I think we need two things for this travel, poetics, but politics, because in the arts and culture, they go together. Yeah, that's my 60 seconds.
Very well said. Thank you. That was very well said. Andre. Your 60 seconds.
Yeah, I tried to be quicker, but I think for me, it's still, we can make that a positive European moment. I mean, at the moment, much is looking bleak, but this could be actually a very positive thing. And we don't have to go back to the Renaissance and the plague. We are here, we are making the future now, and we don't even need a conference about it because we are making the future now, and that can be a positive moment, and culture will need to be the driver. It will not work without it. And that's for me the key takeout of this thing. We are making the future now. Culture and the cultural deal is the key component of it. And then it can be a positive thing.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Snezka.
Yes.
And 60 seconds, because I know how passionate you can be, but come on.
Though we are advocating a cultural deal for Europe, of course, we are talking about a Europe open to the world and in interaction very important with the rest of the world. We want Europe to be championing the values and the SDGs and climate action with the help of culture and cultural heritage. That is my message. And I hope that when we meet in 1 year time, we will be discussing the next State of the Union, European Union speech of Ursula von der Leyen, where a massive chapter will be dedicated to the holistic approach to culture as the driving force for the future of Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm so sorry that I've run over, but also I want to say I'm sorry that we've not been able to take all your questions. There have been so many, and I thought, 2 hours, will we fill it? But we've absolutely overfilled it. It just shows you what the passion is, but also the gap there is out there for having this conversation and making sure we're able to connect in these difficult times. And because without this kind of coming together, we won't be able to galvanize ourselves into a mode of action. And I think that's been the consistent theme here, is that how do we unify with a common purpose, which is obviously there. Those of you who've been in the poll, you're up for that. But how do you make sure this happens in a consistent way? And I think for once, actually for an issue, it's been heartening to hear how many politicians who are actually saying, come and push us, be unified, and actually power our elbow, if you like, to use a Scottish phrase, that to move us forward. And so there's a door open of opportunity to make this happen. And as Jessica said, let's see what happens in next year, but actually let's see what happens in the next 5 months. So I want to thank you, because events like this are meaningless without your participation and you being able to engage with us. So thank you very, very much for being with us for this past 2 hours. I want to thank all the organizers and the teams that have been supporting us here to give you this opportunity to engage and debate. And let's not forget, I think, let's not underestimate the value of arts and culture for us now, but into the future, to protect our fundamental ideals. And I think one thing, a thought, when I was experiencing what people were doing on the streets around the lockdown, but they're doing now, I think there's a sense that communities are remaking what it is to be European in different ways and responding to that notion of what happens when you're in lockdown. And I think the arts and cultural sector has the canny capability to be able to be the spring well of ideas, but also be ahead of the intelligence curve in terms of what Europe in the future will behave like, and its value base will be more important than ever. Thank you all very much for joining us. And remember, #cultural, the New Deal for Europe, and basically the statement on the 20th. Thank you all very much, and see you again, hopefully potentially next year. Take care. Bye-bye.